Hello there, everyone. It's Mr. E, and I'm here today to talk about Executioner's Stance, which is actually my favorite veteran ability. However, it's not very good these days. Executioner's Stance has a lot of problems of its own, but I was going to make this video, first and foremost, about improving Executioner's Stance, but I realized that Executioners and Infiltrate have a big hurdle to overcome, right? If I were to make any buffs to them, I would have to make the buffs good enough that you would want to pick them. And you need to want to pick them over the other options, or at least as much as the other options for them to see any use at all. And that is the main hurdle that any ability in this game has to overcome, but especially applies to these two abilities that belong to the veteran, because they have the greatest hurdle to overcome of them all, which is that they need to be comparable in power to Shout. Shout is absurdly powerful, as I covered in my last video. I hope that there are people that watch my last video, and especially hope there are people that watch my last video and maybe disagreed with me, because I'll continue to make my point here, and hopefully you can see it how I see it. I got a lot of comments from people saying that we shouldn't be messing with Shout. We should be buffing the other two things to compensate, and I think that's a good idea. So we're going to be exploring that idea today. And let's just first go over what Shout gives us, so we have a better understanding of how powerful it is. First of all, it fills your toughness wherever your toughness is at, 0, 50, whatever. You go to full. You knock down all enemies around you within 9 meters, and this is a hard knockdown, so it applies to bosses and crushers as well. They get staggered out of any animations they're doing, so it's an interrupt for them, which is awesome. It has a 30-second cooldown, which is the shortest cooldown in the game, tied with Shroudfield. It gives you 50 seconds of gold toughness, or sorry, plus 50 gold toughness, my bad, which gold toughness protects you against any health damage as long as you have any gold toughness in your bar at all. The only thing you can take health damage from would be an exploding barrel. This means that you can take a sniper shot, a burster explosion, a crusher or boss overhead. All of that stuff is negated as long as you have at least 1 point of gold toughness in your bar. And this buff has a 15-second duration, which means that even if your toughness is broken, if you have a way to regenerate it, you can instantly go back to having full health protection again. So for instance, if you have another Shout veteran on your team and you are also a Shout veteran and your toughness is broken, if you press your Shout ability afterwards, it will fill your toughness to full, which is gold toughness, so it will overcap your toughness, so you two can alternate being pretty much invincible. And then also, this ability is team-wide, so it applies to every member on your team that's within coherency, which is fairly easy to do, especially when players understand you have Shout, they want to play around you. So this ability is really, really good, and I think that contributes to what I would estimate is roughly a 90% pick rate. That's what these numbers represent up here at the top. This number actually it's hypothetical, but I think it actually might be higher now that I'm thinking about it, especially in higher difficulties. I have seen maybe one Executioner Stance out of 50 games. I have not seen an Infiltrate ability in probably a year or more. That's how uncommon these abilities are to see at higher difficulties, because Shout is just so good, and Shout is really easy to use as well, which is a point I'll come back to in a second. But now that we've gotten this far, I want to encourage you. This is the first part of our little thought experiment today. I want to encourage you to think about why in your conceptualization of things, why Shout is so popular, why it is the most picked ability. Because even if these numbers aren't exactly correct, they are in the ballpark of correct. We see way more Shout veterans than anything else. Why is that? And you don't have to share that, or you can put it in the comments if you want, but just think to yourself and keep it in the forefront of your mind, because we're coming back to it in just a second. Why is Shout the most picked? For me, the reason that I would think is because it causes you to win games. It solves all of the hard situations in games, such as when players are down and need to be picked up. It can get you out of corners and stuff where you would get stuck and get killed otherwise. It's just an awesome ability that supports the team, and you get a lot of positive feedback from your team for using it at the right times. It wins games, and it makes you feel good for contributing to the team, even if you're a low skill player. If you're pressing this thing on cooldown all the time, pressing it randomly, if you had bots that were walking around just spamming Shout, those bots would be amazing. That's how you can think of it. It doesn't require any skill to use. Just shout it whenever, and it's pretty much fine because that duration is so nice and long. So that's why I think it's the most picked. Whatever reason you think, keep that in the forefront of your mind, because now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what people think we should have done with, or what we should do about the situation. Personally, the reason I make these videos is because I want to see equality. I want to see parity between all of the choices in the game so that there is more diversity of builds. You don't feel bad for bringing Executioner's Stance because it's way worse than Shout. You don't feel bad for bringing the Ogryn because he's worse than the Veteran or the Zealot at this and that. I want every build to be roughly equal so that there's reasons to bring each different build, each different weapon, each different talent. And so there's two ways we could get to that with these three abilities, right? We could do what I think we should do, which is we should take Shout down a little bit in power level, and we should bring Executioners up a lot. Or we could do what the vast majority of commenters in the last video suggested, which is we should only be buffing these other two abilities, and we should not touch Shout at all, because there shouldn't be no nerfs, because this is a PvE game. On the surface, I kind of tend to agree with that, but it does run into some problems, and we're going to explore that idea so that we can see what the problems are. So here we go. What we're going to first do is we're going to make these two abilities as powerful as Shout is. And in order to do that, we're going to come up with new versions of these abilities. First, let me introduce you to Super Infiltrate. Super Infiltrate has a 10-second duration and only a 30-second cooldown. You can also fire your gun while you are in stealth, which is pretty cool, right? We can mag dump a bolter into a crusher and they won't even notice we're there. Then we also have Super Executioner's Stance. Super Executioner's Stance, in addition to all the normal chaining stuff, also, Infiltrate gets all the same stuff it has in its augments as well, but you can chain this ability by continuing to kill marked elites as long as you have ammo for it. You get range damage 50% instead of 25%. You also get 25% reload speed, and we get a sort of a small force field around us that protects us against melee attacks from non-elite enemies. So things like Ragers and Crushers can still get to us, but little tiny annoying enemies, they can no longer melee us while this ability is active. So it stops us from being harassed all the time while we're trying to line up shots. Okay, so now that these buffs have happened, this no longer represents the distribution of choice in the game, right? And players aren't choosing at this rate anymore. And this is where the second part of audience participation comes in. I'd like you to think back to just a second ago when I asked you why Shout was the most chosen ability, and apply that same logic to these two abilities. And remember to assume that these abilities have always been in the game. We don't want any novelty, influencing our choices here. But yeah, go down in the comments below and tell me which one of these abilities you think is the most chosen ability if this was the three choices you had on Veteran. Why is it the predominant one that you see in the meta? And while you're down in the comments, if you could also like the video to push it in the algorithm, that would be super awesome. And even better than that, if you could subscribe. I am so close to 9,000, and we just have 1,000 more to go. I'm trying to get them for the end of the year. I've had a goal for a few months now of 10,000 before the year is out, and I just need to get a little over 63 of you guys per day. I know there's some of y'all out there that are hanging back and haven't subbed yet. I would appreciate it so much if you would. And also, if you're already subbed and you feel like you need to support me even more, you could become a member. Here's a whole list of members that are members of my channel that have chosen to support me or been gifted a opportunity to support me. I really appreciate all of you guys so much, especially my international men of mystery who are subbed at the $10 tier. You guys are so awesome. Okay, now that that's all done and you've posted down below what you think would be the most popular ability, I'm going to tell you what I think would be the most popular ability, the most chosen. What would be the meta? I think that this would be the rough breakdown. I think that Infiltrate, Super Infiltrate, and Super Executioners would both end up with roughly the same pick rate. They offer really nice power. Maybe they'd be something that would make them pull ahead, but I still think at the end of the day that Shout would be the most chosen ability on Veteran, because this is a really easy ability to use. It requires almost no or next to no game knowledge or skill. For Executioner's Stance, if you can't aim, there's nothing in here that gives you, aim assist. There's nothing in here that, makes you zip and snap every shot to enemies' heads and instantly execute them. It's just a really, really big buff. And if you could keep it going, it's awesome. But is it going to solve situations that Shout can solve? And the same thing with Infiltrate. It's got an awesome duration. You could do so much with this. However, it requires a lot of game knowledge and just general skill to use stealth skills effectively. I'm certain we've all seen the Shroudfield Zealot who saw a build and was like, oh my god, that's the most powerful Zealot build, I'm running it right now. And they ran ahead of the team and they got downed immediately. Because when you're playing a stealth build, you're very, very vulnerable when you're not stealthed, and you could very easily get killed and be way out of position. So you need to know something about the game and have some skill with the game to use these abilities. Shout, you do not. Shout just gives the goodness all the time, has a really short cooldown, and it contributes to the team. You're never going to get anyone calling you a selfish bastard like when you're playing with Infiltrate. You're never going to miss shots or have a low ammo map or something like you would when you have Executioners. So I think Shout will still come out ahead. No matter what you said down below, you have to agree that these three abilities are all way closer in power now, right, with this change. Even if you thought maybe Super Infiltrate was picked the most and the other two would be 30%, they are pretty close in power level. And I think that alone should say something about the power level of Shout, considering when we look at the bigger picture, these skills here as written are probably the most powerful skills that Darktide would have ever seen. These skills are absurd. This is just a better version of Shroudfield because you can just shoot for 10 whole seconds without anything even noticing you're there. This is just a better version of Scryer's Gaze. You get 50% damage and you don't have to do anything. You get reload speed and little shits can't hit you. There's no duration on this because you can continue chaining it forever as long as you can kill targets. These abilities are awesome. They are super, super powerful. And the fact that Shout can even compete with them should really tell you something about how good Shout is. Now, this is like, I'm saying that, but look, we accomplished our goal, right? The goal that I laid out at the start, which is I want to see all of our abilities be roughly the same power level, or roughly the same pick rate, because it adds variety to the game. And you would see way more variety in veterans with a change like this, because they would have more choices that are roughly the same power level. You wouldn't feel bad about bringing Infiltrate if it could do this compared to what Shout can do, or at least not as bad. But let's not pat ourselves in the back just yet, because we forgot to consider the big picture here, which is that Veteran exists as part of the whole game. They're one of 4 classes. And if you make these changes to Veteran who already has access to the best melee weapon with the dueling sword, the best range weapon with the plasma gun, the best ultimate ability with Shout, some of the best other minor abilities in the game, Veteran is already one of the most picked classes. Zealot is probably right there too. Ogryn and Psyker are a little bit behind because Ogryns are Ogryns and Psykers are hard to play. If you made these changes and made Veterans have even more power on their tree, they now have the other 2 best ultimates in the whole game, what do you think is going to happen to the pick rates? I think it's going to be less like this and more like this, because players are suddenly going to realize that there's no reason to play Shroudfield Zealot. 30% or 1/3 of Zealots are going to hop over to Veteran because they have an Infiltrate over there you can fire your gun during and last 5 more seconds than the Shroudfield does. Ogryns, they're bored in their class. They only have 2 builds. So they hop over to Veteran because these builds are crazy. This looks like a fucking ton of fun to play with these abilities. And Psyker has Gun Psyker, but this is just better Gun Psyker now. You're way safer, and this does pretty much as much or more damage than the Scryer's Gaze does without any of those extra restrictions you have to work around for a Psyker. So a lot more players would play Veteran because it is so powerful and it's fun to be powerful. But what happens to the overall diversity of the game? What's worse for the game? Having just one ability that stands out, or having one whole class that is just used way more than all the others? So you can see here we fixed the smaller problem of having imbalance among the abilities of Veteran, but we've created a much larger one, which is that we are creating imbalance among the classes. And class diversity in this game is the most important set of variety, because it affects what tools you can bring to each match. So with that being said, hopefully now people can understand why my approach to this is that we should not create super infiltrate. We should not create super executioners, right? These abilities are absurd. What we should do is we should take shout and we should knock it down like a peg or maybe two and bring it in line more with some of the other most powerful abilities in the game. It can still be the most powerful ability in the game even after it receives a nerf. It is so far an outlier over some of these other classes' abilities that you could still nerf it and it would still be insanely powerful on any other class. Once we've nerfed shout, once shout has been brought sort of more in line, then we can buff Executioner's Stance and we can buff Infiltrate and bring them up to comparable levels, and we wouldn't have to worry about breaking the game and making one class have insane power creep while the others are languishing. And I'm already hearing the comments saying, well, just buff the other classes then too. Well, first of all, let's live in reality here. The amount of time it takes to change one ability is approximately in infinity. Changing 9 other abilities is a huge hurdle to overcome from a like game design standpoint. And also, if all of the classes are then buffed, we're dealing with such extremes of power that then the gain is going to get way too easy, and we're going to have to buff the enemies, and then where does it stop, right? You just end up with this huge runaway snowball of power creep like you see in so many end game MMOs that like just don't know where to go expansion after expansion. So let's keep it simple. Let's tune down shout and let's tune up infiltrate and executioners and have them meet somewhere in the middle for that nice sweet spot. Yeah, they might not get picked as much as shout even if shout gets nerfed, but they can be a little bit more in parity and it won't break the game wide open in the process. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate everyone, especially if you went and liked and subscribed during this video, and I love you all. I'll see you tomorrow for the second part of the video where we're going to talk about what I would like to see done with executioners to make it good, sooner rather than later. Alright, peace out guys.